Good evening. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Tuesday. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house? Steven in New Hampshire, Sharon in New Jersey, Bella in Florida, Karen in Northern California, Belle in Texas, Shandor in the Bronx, Paul in the Great Northwest, David in Indiana, Joe in the Inland Empire, Bill in mid-Missouri, Ella says shalom, Marjorie says shalom, Aoife in Florida, Joseph in Massachusetts. Here we go. Tonight's episode of AT Daily, sponsored by our own Mickey Stein, in honor of Rabbi Eliezer Mishalovin. May Rabbi Eliezer Mishalovin and all his loved ones be blessed, be showered in blessings. And Mickey, may you and all your loved ones be showered in blessings. We say amen. And thank you for enabling us to share more Torah with more people around the world. Okay. We're going to do our daf tonight, which is page 33 here in Tractate Bava Kamma, the 21st volume of the Talmud. Continuing our journey through chapter 3 and continuing our discussion of Mishna number 8 here in chapter 3. At the end of our class, I'll take some questions and we'll sign off like we always do. And then I'm going to go live again at the top of the hour as part of the Tikkun HaKlali Light of the Infinite Festival, which was created by our good friend Erez Safar. He's been having speakers all day long. I think Nina will share, probably has shared, and I know we had a link on our page, but Nina, maybe if you're listening, you could put this in the comments. So you can watch either here, like you always do on Facebook. It won't be on YouTube, but it'll be on Facebook. And I'm going to be telling an amazing, unbelievable story about two Hasidic Rebbes that, it's like a thriller, like a murder and spy thriller from 1836. So much drama involved. Including a personal connection for me, as you'll see, a slight connection to that story. But it's an amazing story of Rabbi Nussin of Breslov and the Savrunner Rebbe, as I will explain. And that's at the top of the hour when I go live again as part of the Light of the Infinite Tikkun HaKlali Festival. Okay. Also, Hanukkah starts Thursday night. And today actually is a very, very unusual day in the Jewish calendar. Tonight, when I went to Ma'ariv, to the evening service, we started saying Talu Matar Livracha. So in the Shmona Esrei, we started saying, in one of the blessings where we're sort of asking for the year to be a good year. And within it, there's a little variation depending on the time of year. You're either asking God to grant blessing or to grant dew for rain and dew for a blessing. What is the exact words? I just say it in Hebrew. But the point being that the changeover, right, from saying V'sein bracha to V'sein Talu Matar Libracha, right? So in the summer we say Morid Hatal. No, that's not there. It's the same bracha. Where is it? Does Chabad not make that change? This is a Chabad sitter. I think they probably do. Yeah, right. So right. It's the blessing where we say, "Bless for us, Lord our God, this year and all the varieties of its produce for good, and bestow." Blessing, bracha, that's what we say in the summer, but starting tonight and until Passover, we say bestow dew and rain for a blessing, right? This is the rainy season when the Holy Land needs rain, needs dew and rain, so that the water, the crops are watered over the winter, so that the harvest can begin in the spring. What's interesting about this change and why we're doing it tonight is that it's not tied to any particular date in the Hebrew calendar, right? So it's going to be, the changeover is going to fall on a different date every year in the Hebrew calendar. but it's always going to be either December 4th or December 5th if there's a leap year coming up, and that's why it's December 5th this year. And you're thinking, think about that. We have our own Hebrew calendar, right? And we have to add a leap month in 7 out of 19 years so that the holidays fall roughly at the same time of year, spring, summer, fall, etc. So the sages were certainly aware of the solar year, but the Hebrew calendar follows lunar months that need this periodic adjustment so that they track the solar year. But this particular change from bestow blessing to bestow dew and rain for a blessing always happens on this date in the solar year. And you have to remember to do, and that was tonight. So like I said, it's always December 4th. But if the upcoming year, next year is a leap year, then it becomes December 5th when the change is made. And I believe that in a certain number of years in the future, that's going to change to December 5th or 6th. And it has to do with these little micro adjustments because, the year is not exactly 365 days. It's 365 and a quarter. That's why a leap year has an extra day, February 29th. But even the quarter is not exactly right. There's a little bit more of adjustment that has to be made. And so I think once a century, there's not a leap year, something like that. And if you're interested, you can Google this question. I've read it in the past. I found it fascinating. I can't remember exactly how the math and astronomy works and the reasoning for all of this that I could repeat it to you. But today is the day. Okay. Continuing our discussion of Mishnah number 8 here in chapter 3, the Mishnah held that if somebody was chopping wood in the public domain and a chip flew onto a private domain and caused damage, or he's chopping wood in the private domain and the chip flew into the public domain and caused damage, or he's chopping wood in his own private domain and the chip flew onto somebody else's private domain and caused damage. In all these cases, the one chopping the wood that sent the chip flying that hurt someone or something, he's liable. Okay. The sages taught, with regard to salaried laborers who came into their employer's courtyard to claim their wages from the homeowner, and the homeowner's ox gored them, or the homeowner's dog bit them, and the laborer died, the homeowner is exempt. Now, why are we talking about a laborer? As so often happens, the sages jump to the more complicated and interesting case before they say what the law would be in the simple case. The simple case is, if you knock on my door and I let you in, okay, so then you're in my property with my permission, like we were talking about the carpenter in his wood shop, that if somebody gets hurt in his wood shop and he was there with the carpenter's permission, then the carpenter is liable for hurting him. But if the person entered without the carpenter's permission, then the carpenter is not liable because he didn't know that this guy was there, had no reason to believe he would be there when the dangerous situation was created. So likewise, if you come onto my property without my permission and my ox gores you or my dog bites you, tough on you. If I invite you in and my ox gores you or my dog bites you, then I am liable for that because you were there with my permission. Now, this laborer, this worker who comes to collect his check, why are we talking about him? Because he certainly has every right to ask for his salary. But asking for his salary doesn't mean that he can enter my property without my permission. And that's where the nuance of this question is going to lie, right? So if he came to claim his wages from the homeowner and the homeowner's ox gored them or the homeowner's dog bit them and a laborer died, the homeowner is exempt. Others say that the homeowner is liable, as salaried laborers are allowed to enter their employer's property to claim their wages from the homeowner. So the Gemara asks, what are the circumstances? If the employer can be found in the city, what is the reason of the others, right, these other halachic voices who find the homeowner liable? The laborers could have met him in the city to claim their wages. They did not need to enter his courtyard without his permission. And if he can be found only at home, then what is the reason of the first Tana of this Baraisa who exempts him? Clearly, they are entitled to enter their wages, and the only way they can get their wages is to enter his courtyard, and that's why they were there. So that would be permitted. That's like with his permission, and therefore, why would he be exempt? So the Gemara answers, no, you misunderstood the circumstances. The law, this halacha is necessary only with regard to a man who sometimes can be found in town and sometimes cannot be found in town. And the laborers called to him at the gate of his courtyard, and he said to them, yes. Now, one sage referred to as the others in this Baraisa holds that the term yes in this context means come in. Therefore, he is liable for their death because they're on his property with his permission. And the other sage, the first Tana in this Baraisa, holds that the term yes in this context indicates stay there and I will come and bring you the money. Right? So that's the ambiguity. They knock on his door, the outer gate, and he says to them yes. And they think it means come into the courtyard, but he meant, wait there, I'll come and bring the money to you. Now, it is taught in a Baraisa in accordance with the opinion of the one who says that yes, in this context, indicates stand in your place, wait for me, I'll bring you the money. As it is taught in a Baraisa with regard to a salaried laborer who entered his employer's courtyard to claim his wages from the homeowner, and the homeowner's ox gored him or the dog bit him, the homeowner is exempt, although the laborer entered with permission. And the Gemara asks, why is he exempt if the laborer entered with permission? Rather, is it not because it is a case where the laborer called him at the gate and he said to him, yes? Conclude from it that yes, in this context, indicates stand in your place. Yes doesn't mean come in. Yes means I understand you're here. I acknowledge you. I will be with you in a moment and I will meet you at the gate. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 8. Mishnah number 9, with regard to two innocuous oxen, right? A tam is an innocuous ox that does not have a history of goring or kicking or attacking people. So with regard to two innocuous oxen that injured each other, the respective damages are evaluated, and if one amount is more than the other, the owner pays half the damages with regard to the difference. And this makes sense because, as we learned from the very first Mishnah in this tractate, when an ox gores another person or animal or causes damage, if it's an innocuous ox, then the owner is liable to pay half the damages, whether in the public domain or private domain. And if he's a muad, a forewarned ox, an ox that has an established history of being a dangerous animal, of goring, kicking, etc., and now it does damage, the owner is on the hook for all of the damage that the ox causes. And what's more, the injured party has recourse not only to the animal itself, to sell it, slaughter it, to pay for the damages, but even to the superior quality land of the ox's owner. So where am I? Okay. So in other words, the owner of the ox that caused the greater damage pays the owner half the difference. If both oxen were forewarned, the owner of the ox that caused the greater damage pays the full cost of the damage with regard to the difference. In a case where one of the oxen was innocuous and the other one was forewarned, if the forewarned ox caused greater damage to the innocuous ox than the reverse, the owner of the forewarned ox pays the full cost of the damage with regard to the difference. If the innocuous ox caused greater damage to the forewarned ox, its owner pays half the damage with regard to the difference between their damages. And similarly, with regard to two people who injured each other, the one who did greater damage pays the full cost of the damage with regard to the difference, since one is always considered forewarned with regard to damage that he personally causes. You can't say that, well, I never caused damage before, I don't have to pay half damages like an innocuous ox. No, a person is deemed forewarned for any damage that he himself personally causes. if a person caused damage to a forewarned ox, and the forewarned ox caused damage to the person. Whichever side caused the greater damage pays the full cost of the damage with regard to the difference. In a case where a person caused damage to an innocuous ox and the innocuous ox caused damage to the person, if the person caused greater financial damage to the innocuous ox, he pays the full cost of the damage with regard to the difference, because a person is always deemed forewarned. If the innocuous ox caused greater damage to the person, its owner pays only half the damage with regard to the difference between the two sets of damages. Rabbi Akiva says the owner of the innocuous ox that injured a person also pays the full cost of the damage with regard to the difference, and this is because Rabbi Akiva does not distinguish between an innocuous ox and a forewarned ox in a case where the ox injures a person. But that's the minority opinion. The majority overruled Rabbi Akiva. That was Mishnah number 9. Here comes the Gemara. With regard to the dispute between Rabbi Akiva and the rabbis about a case where an ox injures a person, the sages taught it is derived from the verse, whether it has gored a son or has gored a daughter, according to this judgment shall it be done to him. Exodus 21:31. Meaning that as is the judgment concerning an ox that causes damage to an ox, so is the judgment with regard to an ox that causes damage to a person. Just as with regard to an ox that causes damage to an ox, if it is innocuous, its owner pays half the cost of the damage, and if it is forewarned, he pays the full cost of the damage, so too with regard to an ox that causes damage to a person. If it is an innocuous ox, its owner pays half the cost of the damage, and if it is a forewarned ox, the owner pays the full cost of the damage. Rabbi Akiva says it is derived from the phrase according to this judgment, meaning that the law with regard to an ox that gores a person is judged like the case that appears in the lower verse, i.e. in the case of a forewarned ox, which appears in Exodus 21:29, and not like the case that appears in the upper verse, i.e. the case of an innocuous ox, which appears in Exodus 21:28. Now, one might have thought that since the case of an ox that gored a person is compared to the case of a forewarned ox, the owner also pays from his superior quality property. Therefore, the verse states, shall it be done to him, indicating he pays restitution exclusively from the proceeds of the sale of the body of his belligerent ox, and does not pay from his superior quality property. As the word law in this context can also be understood as referring to the ox. In this manner, the case of an innocuous ox that gores a person is compared to the law of an innocuous ox that gores another ox, whereas with regard to the amount of restitution, it is compared to the case of a forewarned ox. So the Gemara asks, and according to the opinion of the rabbis who do not differentiate between an ox that gores a person and one that gores an animal, inasmuch as the distinction between an innocuous ox and a forewarned ox applies in both cases, why do I need the seemingly superfluous word this? And the Gemara answers, I have not been sneezing all day. Must be some dust in here, but the room is clean. I don't know. I feel like I've been getting sniffles in the evening every day this week. Okay. Where am I? Why do I need the seemingly superfluous word this? The Gemara answers, the word is stated to exempt him from the 4 types of indemnity that one who injures another person is liable to pay, thereby emphasizing the comparison to the case of an ox that gores an ox. So the Gemara asks, and from where does Rabbi Akiva derive the law exempting him from paying these 4 types of indemnity? And the Gemara answers, he derives it from the verse, and if a man maims his neighbor, as he has done, so shall be done to him. Rabbi Akiva derives from here that only when a man injures his neighbor is he liable to pay these 4 types of indemnity, but not when an ox injures his neighbor. And so the Gemara asks, and why did the rabbis not derive this law from that verse? And the Gemara answers, if it would have been derived from that verse, I would have said that he is exempt only from paying for pain. But for medical costs and loss of livelihood, I would say that he is liable to give him compensation. Therefore, the phrase, according to this judgment, teaches us that he is not liable to pay compensation for anything other than the damage itself. That concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 9. Here is Mishnah number 10 here in chapter 3. With regard to an innocuous ox worth 100 dinars, that gored an ox worth 200 dinars. Okay, innocuous ox, so we're going to have to pay half damages. No history of goring. The goring ox, the innocuous ox, is worth 100 dinars, and the ox that gets gored is worth 200 dinars. Okay? And the carcass of the dead ox, the 200 dinar ox, is now dead. The carcass of the dead ox is not worth anything, right? Because the carcass might have value, but for whatever reason, maybe it lay there for a while before they got around to liquidating it, so now it's not worth anything. So in this situation, the owner of the dead ox takes the entire ox that gored his ox, since it is worth half the value of the damage that it caused, right? The 100 dinar ox killed a 200 dinar ox. The carcass is worth nothing. So the owner of the dead ox now takes the goring ox as his own. And that makes sense. Now, here's the Gemara, whose opinion is expressed in the Mishnah, which rules that the injured party takes the ox immediately. It is the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, as it is taught in a Baraisa, after it gores another ox, the belligerent ox, the one who gored, shall be appraised in court before it is taken by the injured party. This is the statement of Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Akiva says the ox was already assigned to the owner of the dead ox as payment, and if the amount of damages is not contested by the owner of the goring ox, no further legal steps are required. We can have court right here between civilians. And the Gemara explains, with regard to what principle do Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva disagree? So Rabbi Yishmael holds that the owner of the dead ox is considered a creditor of the owner of the belligerent ox, and it is money that he is claiming from him. But he has no ownership of the body of the belligerent ox. And Rabbi Akiva holds that they are partners, i.e. from the time the innocuous ox killed the other ox, the owner of the dead ox has a share of ownership in the belligerent ox. And they disagree with regard to the meaning of this verse, Exodus 21:35. Then they shall sell the live ox and divide its monetary value. And Rabbi Yishmael holds that the merciful one is commanding the court to evaluate the damages in this manner. And Rabbi Akiva holds that the merciful one is commanding the injured party and the one liable for damage to split ownership of the live ox without the involvement of the court. So the Gemara asks, what is the practical difference between the two opinions as to whether or not they are considered partners? And the Gemara answers, there is a practical difference between them in a case where the injured party consecrated the ox to the temple. So according to the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael, until the court transfers the ox to the injured party, it still belongs to its owner. And therefore, the injured party cannot consecrate it. According to the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, the injured party owns the ox from the time the damage was inflicted, and he therefore has the right and the ability to consecrate it, make a gift to the holy temple of that ox. So Rava asked Rav Nachman, if the one liable for the damage sold the ox, what is the law according to Rabbi Yishmael? Is it that since Rabbi Yishmael says that the injured party is considered a creditor and it is merely money that he is claiming from him, it is sold? Or perhaps does he say that since the ox is liened to the debt to the injured party who will collect it should the ox's owner not have sufficient funds, it is not in his power to sell it? And Rav Nachman said to him, it is not sold. So Rava, and now we're on page 33b. So Rava asked him, but isn't it taught in a Baraisa that if he sold it, it is sold? So Rav Nachman replied, nevertheless, the injured party then collects it from the purchaser. And the Gemara asks, since the injured party then collects it from the purchaser, with regard to what matter is it sold? His right to collect it negates the effectiveness of the sale. And the Gemara answers, it is sold for the purpose of plowing. The purchaser may use the ox for plowing until the injured party collects it from him. And the purchaser is not required to reimburse the injured party for the use of his ox. And the Gemara asks, should one conclude from this ruling that with regard to one who borrows money and then sells his movable property to the court, and then sells his movable property, the court can collect the debt from this party on behalf of the creditor? As according to Rabbi Yishmael, the belligerent ox is only a lien for the debt owed to the injured party. And the Gemara answers, there, in the case of the belligerent ox, it is different, as the owner of the ox is considered like one who rendered it designated payment of the debt, since the Torah specifies that the injured party collects damages from the ox. In general, however, movable property that is sold by a debtor cannot be collected by the creditor, right? If Tom lends me $100, let's go Reuven and Shimon. Reuven lends me $100. I owe him $100. I've got movable property that he could come and take as collateral in case I don't have the cash to pay back the loan. But I'm really hard up. So my movable property, let's say my car, I sell it. So now I have 100 dinars in cash, but Reuven doesn't show up to collect his debt on that day. And so then I go and spend 100 dinars. Now I've got nothing. He could say, well, you owe me, he says to me, you owe me 100 dinars. I don't have anything. But you had that car. I sold the car. That car was mine because it was collateral for the loan. Now, I don't think he had specific, it was not named collateral with a lien on it. It's just what I happened to own at the time that he lent the money to me. And so there is no lien on that car. When I sold the car to a third party, to Shimon, let's say, that's a final sale. And Reuven can't go to Shimon and say, hey, you've got Sal's car, but Sal owes me 100 dinars. He had no right to sell you that car. I'm going to take the car. He can't do that. With land, he could do that, right? He would have a lien on my land. So if I sold the land to Shimon, Reuven could go and collect that land from Shimon, but not movable property. Now the Gemara asks, but doesn't Rava say that if one rendered his slave as designated payment for a debt, meaning that particular movable property, in this case a slave, which is usually likened to land actually, but at any rate, is designated as payment for a loan, right? So now, in other words, the contract says if you can't pay me the loan, you're going to owe me that car or you're going to owe me that slave back, in ancient times when slavery was practiced. So doesn't Rava say that if one rendered his slave as designated repayment for a debt and subsequently sold the slave, the creditor collects payment from the purchaser? Whereas if one rendered his ox as designated repayment and then sold it, the creditor cannot collect it from the purchaser. And this contradicts the previous statement that the belligerent ox is considered designated repayment, and therefore, even if it is sold, the injured party can collect it from the purchaser. And the Gemara answers, the distinction made in Rava's statement answers this question. What is the reason that a slave who was rendered as designated repayment can be collected from the purchaser? It is because rendering a slave as designated repayment is not common and it generates publicity. So the purchaser was therefore aware of this when he bought the slave. Similarly, with regard to this ox as well, since it gored an animal, it generates publicity, as it is publicly called a goring ox. And so the purchaser was aware of the lien attached to it. Therefore, the injured party can collect it from the purchaser. But in a more common situation where the purchaser of the movable property would have no reason to know that that movable property had been designated as the thing to repay the loan if cash was unavailable for the lender, unless he knew that, in other words, if he had no reason to know that, then the lender cannot go to that purchaser and collect that property. Now, Rav Tachalifa from the west, meaning Eretz Yisrael, as opposed to the community in Bava in Babylonia. So Rav Tachalifa from the west taught the following baraisa with regard to the belligerent ox, and he taught it before Rabbi Abahu. If he sold it, it is not sold. But if he consecrated it, it is consecrated. Now, this is all based on after my innocuous ox gores Reuven's ox and causes, and kills his ox. So now the question is, does Reuven own my ox, like by the opinion, like per Rabbi Akiva? Or does he simply have a right to collect 100 dinars from me? And, maybe he's going to be able to get that from my ox, or maybe I'm going to sell it, or maybe once the court gets involved, they can seize my ox, but he can't just take the ox home, right? And Rabbi Akiva is probably on the minority position in this situation. So let's keep going. So, in other words, before he's collected the ox from me, or before the court has collected it, what if I sell my ox, or what if I consecrate my ox, right? And so Rav Tachalifa is saying if I sold it, it's not sold. The court can come and collect it, perhaps even just the guy. But if I consecrated my ox, then it is consecrated. Now the Gemara asks, who sold it? Is it the injured party or the liable party? If we say it is the one liable for the damage, whose opinion is it that if he sold it, it is not sold? It is the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, who says that the ox was already assigned to the injured party. But in the following statement of the Baraisa, that if he consecrated it, it is consecrated, now we arrive at the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael, who says that the ox shall be appraised in court. It doesn't belong to that guy yet. So if rather it is referring to the injured party selling it, right? So if he has a partnership already in my ox, can he sell the ox? Can he consecrate the ox? Are we really talking about the injured party who has an interest in my goring ox? So if it is referring to the injured party selling it, so whose opinion is it that if he sold it, it is not sold? That would be the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael, because he doesn't own my ox yet, not until the court appraises it. And in the statement of the other statement of the Baraisa, that if he consecrated it, it is consecrated. Then we arrive at the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, that he has an interest in my ox as soon as my ox kills his ox. So the Gemara answers, actually, it is referring to the one liable for the damage. And everyone agrees with its ruling. The ruling that if he sold it, it is not sold, is the law, even according to the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael, as the ox is liened to the injured party, precluding the owner from selling it. He doesn't own it yet, but he has a lien on it. Now, the statement that if he consecrated it, it is consecrated, this is the law even according to Rabbi Akiva, since it is not actually consecrated, but it is considered so only due to the statement of Rabbi Abahu. As Rabbi Abahu says, that if one consecrates liened property, although the consecration does not take effect, nevertheless he is required to redeem it due to a rabbinic decree, lest people say that consecrated property can be removed from the ownership of the temple treasury without redemption. In other words, the one who consecrates this ox, whose status is still sort of up in the air until the court appraises it and determines who owes what to who, if somebody consecrates that ox in the meantime, what that means is the ox doesn't go to the temple, but the one who consecrated it now owes the value of the ox to the temple, irrespective of what happens with it between these two guys. And that is so that people won't think that you can consecrate something and then say, oh, I didn't mean it. I was actually involved in a legal dispute, so I don't know anything. No, if you consecrate, you're going to owe either that thing or its value. Now, the sages taught in a Baraisa, with regard to an innocuous ox that caused damage, if before its owner stood trial, he sold it, then it is sold. If he consecrated it, it is consecrated. If he slaughtered it or gave it as a gift, what he did is done. By contrast, after he has stood trial and is now obligated to pay the injured party, if he sold the ox, it is not sold. If he consecrated it, it is not consecrated. If he slaughtered it or gave it as a gift, he has done nothing. If creditors of the ox's owner collected the ox first, whether he owed the creditors before his ox caused the damage or whether it caused the damage before he owed them, they have done nothing. Their collection is void because compensation to the injured party is paid only from the body of the ox, as it was an innocuous ox, and it is therefore designated exclusively for this compensation. Other creditors can't come in and seize that ox because that ox, the innocuous ox that gored, is now designated for payment of those damages. The ox itself is designated for that. and it can't be seized to satisfy debts, other debts that the owner of that ox had. So the Gemara explains the Baraisa. The master said above, with regard to an innocuous ox, that if he sold it, it is sold. As explained above, the sale is valid only with regard to the purchaser using the ox for plowing in the interim until the injured party collects it. It's more like if the ox is rented, it is rented. So the statement that if he consecrated it, it is consecrated, does not mean that it is actually consecrated, but rather that it must be redeemed through the payment of a minimal sum, due to Rabbi Abahu's statement mentioned above. Now, with regard to the statement that if he slaughtered it or gave it as a present, what he did is done, the Gemara asks, well, granted, if he gave it as a present, what he did is done with regard to the recipient's permission to use it for plowing. But if he slaughtered it, how does that affect the injured party's rights? Let him come and receive payment from the slaughtered ox's meat. This is as it is taught in a Baraisa, it is stated in the Torah, Exodus 21:35, then they shall sell the live ox. Now, I have derived only that the injured party receives a share of ownership if the belligerent ox is alive. From where do I derive that this applies even if the ox's owner slaughtered it? And the verse states, well, then they shall sell the live ox, indicating that in any case, whatever the circumstances, the injured party is paid from the proceeds of the sale of the belligerent ox, right? Innocuous ox, the injured party has recourse only to the body of the goring ox, not other property belonging to its owner. Rav Shezevi said, this statement is necessary only with regard to the diminished value of the ox due to its slaughter. Although the value of the ox may no longer cover the damage, its owner is not liable to compensate the injured party beyond the ox's current value. Only recourse is to the ox's body, even if its value diminishes because it was lying there before it was appraised. Now, Rav Huna, the son of Rabbi Yehoshua, said, that is to say that one who causes damage to another's liened property is exempt from paying compensation since the property does not actually belong to the one who holds the lien. So the Gemara asks, isn't this inference from the Baraisa obvious? And the Gemara answers, Rav Huna, the son of Rabbi Yehoshua, states this law, lest you say that it is specifically there in the case where one slaughters a liened ox, that he is exempt. As he can say to him, I have not detracted anything from what is yours. As he can say to him, I took only spirit from what is yours. He detracted only the life of the ox, not its physical body. And one who causes damage to another's liened property might be exempt from liability for this intangible damage. But generally, one who causes damage to another's lien should be liable. Therefore, Rav Huna, the son of Rabbi Yehoshua, teaches us that one is exempt from liability for all types of damage he causes to another person's liened property. So the Gemara challenges this explanation. Rabbah stated this principle as well, and there would be no need for Rav Huna, the son of Rabbi Yehoshua, to state it. As Rabbah says, one who burns another's documents in which other people's debts to him are recorded is exempt, although the owner of the documents can no longer collect payment from liened property. Wow. I'd imagine if you had a stack of documents that were promissory notes that you were going to use to collect debts that were owed to you, and then somebody burns your stack of documents, let's say, through negligence. So what does he owe you for? He owes you for the value of the paper, but he doesn't owe you for the value of the debts that those documents represented, according to this view. Now the Gemara answers, Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, states this principle, lest you say that it is specifically there that he is exempt. As the perpetrator of the damage can say to the owner of the documents, I burned your mere paper for which I am prepared to pay. But in a case where one dug pits, ditches, or caves on liened land causing substantial damage, he should be liable to compensate the one holding the lien. Therefore, Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, teaches us that even in a case of substantial damage, he is exempt, as the case here, where the ox was slaughtered, is like one who dug pits, ditches, or caves, as slaughter is considered substantial damage. And the Tana said that in this case, what he did is done. Although we also have a very big difference between damage to land and damage that an innocuous ox caused, which already the Torah has separated, from other types of damage because it was an innocuous ox in the, usually in the public domain. Now the Gemara continues to explain the Baraisa, which states, if creditors collected the innocuous ox first, whether its owner owed them before his ox caused damage or whether it caused damage before he owed them, they have done nothing because restitution is paid only from the body of the ox. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in. The Gemara asks, granted in the case where it caused damage before he owed them, the injured parties came first and the ox is liened to the debt. But in the case where he owed them before it caused damage, the creditor collected it first. So why does he not have the preemptive right to the ox? Moreover, now we're at the top of 34a, moreover, even if the ox caused damage before he owed them, nevertheless the creditor came first and seized what he rightfully deserved. So should one conclude from the Baraisa that if a later creditor collected a debt before an earlier creditor, that his collection is not valid and payment should instead be given to the earlier creditor? And the Gemara answers, well, no. Actually, I could say to you that the collection of the later creditor is valid. And there, in the case where a creditor seized the belligerent ox, it is different, as the injured party can say to the creditor who seized the ox, if the ox was in your possession, would I not have collected it from you? The reason I would take it is that I am paid from this ox that caused me damage. I can only be paid from this ox, whereas you, as a creditor, can look to other property that your borrower owns. Therefore, the creditor cannot collect the ox, even if the debt preceded the damage. With respect to this idea of burning another person's documents, where did the law end up? If one damages an asset of another person, indirectly causing him financial loss, for example, by burning his documents, he is liable to compensate him for the entire amount of any debt specified in the documents. So the law is the opposite of what we just read. In accordance with Rabbi Meir's opinion that one is liable for causing indirect damage. That's why you don't paskin halacha from the Gemara, right? If we had just read this and said, oh, the law is if you burn my documents that represent a bunch of debts, all you owe me for is the paper? No, because that's not where the law ended up. The law ended up, according to Rabbi Meir, which we'll read about on another daf. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. Let's take a few questions and comments on Bava Kamma 33. Sharon, great lesson with the change of brachas in the Amida due to the solar calendar. Part of a great class I teach my class about the mitzvah of solar lunar nature of the calendar. I learned so much because I teach. Me too. Thank you, Sharon. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. So I'll be back, God willing, in 15 minutes. I'll just start a new live broadcast if you're interested. It's going to be just a fascinating, dramatic story of a feud between two rebbes in the 1830s. Something you might want to catch. That'll start at 7. It'll be live on Facebook Accidental Talmudist or at the Light of the Infinite Festival, which is going to stream my feed right into their festival. And there's a bunch of other wonderful speakers over there.